right, welcome everyone. I am Lindsay Lessard from the Office of Alumni Relations. Thank you for joining us for a live cooking class with Lidy Heuck, Bowden class of 2013. Lidy began her career working as Ina Garten's assistant for 6 years. You should ask her tonight about how a Bowden connection landed her that job. These days, she is a recipe contributor to the New York Times, the host of instructional cooking videos on the Food Network Kitchen app, and the author of her own cooking and lifestyle blog, lidylikes.com. The class tonight will be 1 hour and is intended to be fun, entertaining, and informative. You're welcome to cook alongside Lidy or just sit back and watch. Questions are welcome throughout the class. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom to type your question. Lidy will be reading and responding as she's able to throughout the class. So just a huge thank you to Lidy for being here tonight and sharing your time and expertise with the Bowden community. I will turn it over to you now.
Thanks, Lindsay. Hi, everyone out there. Hold on, I just want to adjust this screen. I'm so excited to cook for you guys tonight and that you're here with me in spirit. Just a disclaimer that Zoom cooking classes are a lot of fun. The camera angles can sometimes get a little goofy and something might come up. You might hear a dog bark. So we're just gonna go with it and I'll do the best I can. If at any point you can't hear me or there's something funny happening, just send in a little chat and we'll try to sort it out if we can. And thank you, Lindsay, for that great introduction. So the recipe that I'm gonna be making today is spring white bean stew with crispy chicken thighs. It's basically a very easy, healthy kind of spring fresh recipe. It's got white beans, asparagus, peas, kale, or you could use spinach, and then it gets topped with a crispy roasted chicken thigh. One of the things I love about this recipe and why I wanted to make this for tonight's class is it uses a ton of pantry ingredients, things that you have like maybe in your freezer, chicken thighs, peas, things that are easy to find. It's just a good kind of quarantine recipe when ingredients might be limited and you also just want to use up like your cabinet full of beans that you bought and don't know what to do with. So before we get started, I'm just going to tell you sort of the process of the recipe and then we'll dive right in. And one more very important thing to say is that it is happy hour, so I've got my glass of wine. I hope you do too. And don't be alarmed if I take a big sip. Everything's okay over here, I promise. I might need a refill actually. So first we're gonna start with browning the chicken thighs in some olive oil in our pot. And I've got the oven set to 400 degrees already. Then we're going to use some of that chicken fat to saute our vegetables. We'll add some wine, deglaze the pan, add some broth and our beans, bring it to a simmer, and then add our kale and asparagus and kind of cook it until it becomes a nice thick stew. It's a pretty quick recipe and everything comes together in just a few steps. So if you are cooking along, I'll try to do it at a slow enough pace that you can follow. And if you're not cooking along, I'll try to do it at a fast enough pace to keep your attention. So the first thing I'm gonna do is grab my chicken thighs, which I have in the fridge. This is 2 pounds of chicken thighs. It could be anywhere from 4 to 6 thighs, depending on how big they are. I'm gonna grab my paper towels. And first thing we always wanna do when we're searing meat of any kind is pat the skin dry. If the skin's wet, that moisture is gonna produce steam and there's a better chance that the chicken's gonna stick in our pan, which is not what we want. And I'm trying to do this to show you, obviously when you're working with raw chicken, you need to wash your hands constantly. So I try to do this in a way where I'm using something as a buffer. So my hands are staying clean as much as possible. So then I've got my kosher salt. Just gonna very generously salt the skin. Do a little pepper. And then I'm going to turn the heat on our pan to medium-high heat. And I'm going to let the pan heat up before I add the oil. The reason I do that is because olive oil has a lower burning temperature than some other oils like canola oil or grapeseed oil. And sometimes if you put the oil in the pot and then turn on the heat, that oil is going to get too hot and it can burn, which we don't want. While that is coming, while the pot is heating, I want to tell you something extra special about this pot, which I'm going to move this so you can see like all of the pot. This is a pot from Proclamation Goods, which was started by a Bowden alumni, Chris Burridge, class of 2010, I think. Chris, I think, also is on this call, but he sent me this pot, and it comes with a really cool skillet that actually serves as the lid for the pot, which is great. And I've been using it. It's great. It's sort of, I use it in place of a Dutch oven, and it works for soups, stews, anything with meat. It's super all-purpose. It's stainless steel. This is not an ad, by the way, but I love to support another Bowden alum. And so Chris gave me a promo code, which I will at some point put in the chat. And if you're interested, you can put in the Polar Bear promo code for a little discount. But check them out. You can read all about them and find out more. Okay, I can feel the heat from my pot. I don't want to get too smoking hot. So I'm going to pour about 2 tablespoons olive oil. And then I'm going to, as soon as I feel like that's hot enough, put in my chicken. I apologize in advance if you can't hear me over the sizzling. Okay. So I'm going to let this cook skin side down in the pan without moving for about 6 minutes. It's very hard not to mess with the chicken, but you really want it to develop a nice crust and a nice sear. So I'm really going to try not to touch it too much. Except with my clean hand, I'm going to salt and pepper the bottom sides of the chicken that didn't get any seasoning before. And watch out, this is hot oil. Okay, I'm going to wash my hands and I'll be right back. Here I am. The next thing we're going to do is get our shallots going. I think you can see this cutting board. Try to get close. We are going to do a cup of shallots. So I'm going to do them thinly sliced in this recipe. You could also finely dice or mince them, but I kind of like having the texture of the shallot in the finished product. So I'm just going to peel my shallots. And this will be about 4 little shallots. I have 3 kind of medium large ones, so I might not need all of these, we'll see. That said, this is the kind of recipe where things don't need to be precise, and you can kind of throw in what you have. There's no reason to waste a little bit of extra shallot just because it's more than 1 cup. If anything, with ingredients like garlic and onions, I feel like why not just throw the extra in there? It just adds more flavor. One little tip that I always say in my Zoom classes is it's great to have a little kind of like trash bowl, garbage bowl for your odds and ends to keep your workspace clean. I'm not a neat cook by nature, and I have been working on it, but it really helps to have a bowl to put everything you're going to get rid of. As soon as you're done with it, you don't have to like walk back and forth to the garbage can every time. Okay. Great. And here our chicken sizzling. I hope you can hear me over that. If you don't have shallots or you can't find shallots, I was thinking leeks would be really good in this because they've got a nice springy flavor. Or even just a regular old yellow onion. I might say this like 1,000 times in this class, but I feel strongly that now is not the time to be overly picky with ingredients and feel like, oh, I can't make something because I don't have shallots. You can absolutely make it. Okay, now I'm going to turn our shallots. We've got the flat cut side down, and I'm just going to thinly slice. And throw our ends in the bowl. I've got a bunch left over, but don't worry, it won't go to waste. I've been cooking all the time, so I feel like I've got more ingredients laying around than ever. I didn't put a timer on, which I probably would have, but I'm gonna turn this fan on. See if you can hear me over that. Is that really loud? Okay, I'm gonna try it. We're almost done. I really don't want the smoke alarm to go off. I'm gonna cheat and just show you kind of what we're working with. Looking golden brown. I think I'll let that go for just another minute, but we don't want these to burn. We just want to get a nice golden crust. This one looks perfect. So we'll flip them. That guy needs more time. That guy needs more time. Flip. Between the steam from the smoke from the chicken and the onions, it's like, whew. All right. That one just needs a little more time. I have no idea if you can hear me at all. I feel like I'm screaming, but these will just cook for 2 more minutes. Here, I'll come closer. These are going to cook for 2 more minutes, and then I've got a sheet pan. Oh, it's hard to hear me. Sorry. Thank you, Lulu, for the suggestion. If the smoke alarm goes off, we'll deal with it. So I just cooked these for about 2 minutes on the bottom side. They don't need to be fully cooked. They're going to go in the oven. I just like to get a little bit of color on both sides of the chicken. I think this one's good. See, just enough to get some color. Perfect. You can also press down a little bit. I know pieces of chicken are always a little topsy-turvy in the pan. So sometimes I like to just press down with my tongue to make sure the chicken's making really nice contact with the pan. Perfect. All right. This little guy, give him another second. So when the chicken comes out, I'm going to, let's see. All right, I think that guy is good. I'm going to turn off the heat for a second. Take my chicken thighs, put them in the 400-degree oven for anywhere from 15 to 25 minutes. It really depends on the size of the chicken thighs. These are, I would say, like small to medium, but you can get like pretty huge chicken thighs. So you really just want to keep an eye on them, and then you can use an internal thermometer to make sure they're cooked to 165 degrees. Maybe I'll show you that at the end, but for now they're going to go in. So nice and quiet now. It's very peaceful. And I'm going to take out some of, you know what? Hold that. I'm going to set a timer. Another tool I use like every single time I cook. You can get these like on Amazon, at the hardware store, cheap little timer. So much easier than a cell phone, especially when I'm cooking. Like I don't want to be touching my phone and getting all greasy. So I love a good old fashioned timer. Now I've got a lot. I'm going to turn this a little bit. You might lose the top of my head, but I think it's more important to see what's going on here. There's a lot of fat in this pan. We don't want this to be kind of a greasy stew, and I love the flavor that chicken fat adds, but there's a point at which you can definitely have too much. So what I'm going to do is just tilt the pan and kind of spoon out some of that extra fat. You can decide, I mean, the more you leave in here, the richer it's going to be. I like to leave about kind of 3 tablespoons, which I think you can see looks like a nice thin but even coating on the bottom of the pan. And in case you're wondering, how do I get rid of this chicken fat? Please don't put it down the drain. I'm going to put this on the counter and let it cool to room temp, and then I'll just scrape it into the garbage. I get my tongs out of here too. Okay, heat's coming back. think this is a good time for a little sip of wine. It's getting pretty warm in here. We're going to switch this to like a medium-low heat. You can kind of test that the oil is still hot from by throwing a shallot in. It's still going to be pretty hot. So we're going to scrape all of our shallots in. And again, that's about a cup of shallots, give or take. Kind of give these a nice toss. Starting to smell very good in here. You don't want to fuss with them too much because we do want them to get a nice kind of light brown. But if your pan is too hot and you start to smell like a frying shallot smell, just turn the heat down to low until they're kind of cooking a little bit more slowly. This should take about 3, 4, 5 minutes. In the meantime, we're going to take our garlic. I'm doing about a tablespoon of garlic for this recipe. Again, like the shallots, I usually just cut up 3 cloves and then throw them in. Sometimes that's closer to a tablespoon and a half. Sometimes it's a little shy of 1 tablespoon, but depends on if you got those like mammoth garlic cloves or not. These are a nice size. And then every once in a while, I'm just gonna give our shallots a nice toss. One thing I love about this dish is kind of the combination of the heartier flavors from the chicken fat and the shallots and the garlic with the very like springy, bright flavors like lemon juice and the fresh herbs that we're gonna finish this with. I just think it's a great flavor combination, especially for early spring when we all want it to be summer, but it's still freezing and raining every day. Hold on, someone is chatting. Let's see.
Oh, we have a question from Joe Leghorn. Composting organic matter. Let me exit out this box.
Composting is great. I do it back at home in New York City where I live. I have a little compost bucket that I keep in the freezer, and when it's full, I take it to a nearby like collection site where they collect it 5 days a week, I think. I'm currently not at home and I don't have a compost situation, but I do think it's really important to make a habit of it. You can really compost almost everything you cook with, and I think when you start composting, you'll find that you have very little garbage. Food waste, I guess I would say. It's pretty much everything except for like chicken bones and dairy that you can compost. Okay. I'm gonna turn the heat off on that guy just for a second while I chop my garlic because I don't want it to get overdone. So I'm just gonna mince my garlic. You can use a garlic press. I'm not a big fan of the garlic press. Personally, I find it a little hard to clean and kind of just irritating, to be honest, but I know a lot of people like them because their hands don't smell like garlic at the end of this, but I always feel like that's just part of cooking. Okay. Garlic's looking good. I'm not going to mince this too finely. It's going to have plenty of time to cook down. That should be good. So I'm just going to slide this onto my knife. Into the pan we go. Give it a nice toss. We're off the heat, which is okay. We just want the garlic to get a little bit of heat. It's going to start smelling really nice, but we definitely do not want to burn the garlic. So I think the pan is hot enough that just that kind of residual heat is going to cook the garlic. In the meantime, I'm going to grab some white wine from the fridge. Okay, a little wine 101 for cooking. There are all kinds of things on the internet about what wine to use for cooking, and I'm sure every chef has a different answer. My kind of underlying philosophy is that if you want to drink it, you can use it in cooking. You don't need to go out and buy some special wine that's going to be extra perfect for this dish. a dry white wine or a nice kind of medium-bodied red wine, depending on the dish, will work great. Sometimes I'll buy a less expensive bottle of wine and I'll keep it in the fridge as cooking wine, because a lot of times, like, you know, a recipe will call for a 1/3 cup of white wine and I don't want to necessarily open a whole bottle. So I'll have like a bottle of Pinot Grigio or Sauvignon Blanc in the fridge that kind of, you know, maybe isn't as good to drink anymore, but is still perfectly good for cooking wine. That way I don't feel like, oh, I need to open a special bottle just for this recipe. And I always have kind of something on hand in a pinch. All of that said, we always have wine open these days, so not an issue. I'm gonna do about, let's see, I'll measure it. I'm gonna do about a 1/2 cup. 1/3 of a cup's fine if that's all you got left in the bottle. I'm gonna turn our heat up a little bit. I'm gonna pour the wine in. You know what, I feel like that was a scant 1/2 cup. There we go. So as the wine kind of starts to come to a simmer, we want to stir, scraping the bottom of the pan and getting all those little brown bits off. This is called deglazing the pan. When you've been sauteing vegetables and browning meat, these little brown bits of caramelization form on the bottom of the pan. And those are not burned parts, but they're full of flavor and deliciousness. And you just want to make sure to incorporate them in the stock or the broth of whatever you're cooking. So the wine kind of releases them and you can get them all off the bottom. Bring that up to a simmer. Speaking of wine, I'm just going to cook this until it's reduced by about half. I love the flavor that white wine adds to this stew. It kind of cuts the richness and gives it a nice sort of, I don't want to call it acidic, but a nice little edge. Especially when you're using a store chicken broth like this one, it's important to add as much flavor as you can through seasoning, spices, things like white wine or vinegar. It gives the stock or the broth a depth of flavor that a homemade broth would have without having to make it yourself. That said, if you do make homemade broth, this recipe is very, very good with homemade chicken broth. I wanted to make this really easy and accessible, so I'm not like suggesting that you use it, but if you've got it in your freezer, definitely use it. All right, just a quickie. The wine is reduced now by, I would say, it's looking like about half. It's not a perfect science here. It smells really good. So now we're gonna add our white beans. I've got 3 cans of cannellini beans. I'll say similarly to what I said about the chicken stock, if you have the time to cook the beans yourself, this will be even better. It's by no means necessary, and I, to be honest, very rarely cook my own beans. I just think it's so easy to open a can of beans, and I'm not always a planner because you've got to soak the beans overnight if you're going to cook them. But canned beans will do just fine. So I'm stirring to kind of toss the beans in with the wine and the shallots and the garlic, and then I'm going to add our chicken broth. I'm gonna measure this. We're gonna do 3 cups. Whoop. And then I'm gonna keep the other cup from this quart because I might need it later depending on how much evaporates. So we're just gonna add the broth to our beans. Give it a nice stir. I'm gonna kind of crank the heat now to bring this up to a simmer, and I'm gonna season our broth with some kosher salt. It might look like a lot of salt, but it's a lot of beans. And one thing I learned from working for Ina Garten for 6 years is that salt and pepper, but more specifically salt, are much more important than you think in kind of the final taste of something you make. Oftentimes when something like doesn't taste that good or it feels like a little flat, a pinch of salt will really just wake it up. Great. I'm going to put the lid on just for a few minutes to help that come to a boil more quickly. And in the meantime, let's see, we got some chats. Rhodey, hi Rhodey. Well, Rhodey Lloyd says, I'd love to hear about the Bowden connection that landed you the job with Ina. Thanks. Okay, so my friends who are watching know this story, and I've heard it 1,000 times, so I'm sorry to you guys, but I graduated from Bowden with a friend of mine, Peyton Kelly, who might be on this. I have no idea. Let's see, we got another question. And Peyton and I were good friends throughout Bowden. He is from East Hampton, New York, which is where Ina Garten lives. And I had this idea kind of, I think it was like senior spring, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was an English major. I loved writing, but I don't know, I kind of wanted to do something like wacky and out there for my first job out of college. And I don't know why I got it in my head. I knew that Peyton's dad was Ina Garten's lawyer, which is a funny connection. And I had always loved Ina. I had loved her show, her cookbooks. There was just something about her that I loved, even though she was like a 60-year-old woman from the Hamptons where I'd never been, and I had like nothing in common with her. I just thought there was something fun about her, and I loved everything she did. So I got this idea in my head that I was going to go work for her out of college. And I asked Peyton's dad, who I'm now good friends with, if he might be willing to connect me, sheepishly, via email. And he said, oh, Ina, I'm happy to try, but just so you know, she works with like 2 people and she's never hiring. And it just so happened that she was hiring someone to do social media, which is like the only thing I was qualified for as a 22-year-old. And so I ended up going down there for an interview, and she hired me like a few weeks later. And it went from being this crazy idea that I kind of cooked up in my head, no pun intended, to like my job for the next 6 years. And I would just always say to people when I tell that story that, I thought I was crazy, and maybe I was crazy for writing Ina this letter that Peyton's dad sent to her, but I kind of felt like, what's the worst that can happen? She says no, and the worst didn't happen. So I always feel like if you want to do something, it's worth just going for it, even if it feels crazy. And that's my sort of pedantic moment of the cooking class. But thank you, Rhodey. Also, shout out to Peyton if you're on here. Okay, beans are coming to a simmer nicely. I am going to move on to asparagus. We're using 8 ounces asparagus, which is about half of a big bunch. They usually are sold in like 1-pound bunches. I think it's like 8 or 10 asparagus spears. I like to line them up on the cutting board, kind of line the bottoms up, and then go across and cut, I would say like 1.5 inches of the bottom of the stalk. Tends to be really tough. And sometimes, you can take the individual asparagus spears and look, sometimes, they have like little brown bits. You can just trim those. And then, let's see if you can see, I'm gonna move back so hopefully you can see this a little bit better. I'm gonna line them up and try to cut these on the diagonal, which basically means instead of cutting straight across, I'm gonna go totally like diagonal to the asparagus, and that'll just make very visually appealing pieces of asparagus. Totally not necessary, but it's kind of a fun trick that I thought I would show you. So I hold them with my right hand because I'm a lefty, and with the knife at an angle, I just cut all the way. Sometimes it's a little awkward if you haven't done it, but you'll get the hang of it. So we've got our fancy asparagus there. And then what I'm just gonna do is look through the thicker pieces. Some of these bottoms of the stalks are pretty thick, so I'll just cut through those. That way all of our asparagus will cook kind of at the same rate. Perfect. Let's see how our beans are doing. Perfect. I'm gonna put the lid down. Sorry. Great. Coming to a simmer. We'll wait just another minute. Give these a stir. And what's going to kind of happen as the stew cooks, believe it or not, we're not very far from the end of the stew, so it's not that much longer, but as these white beans, which are already cooked, kind of get cooked again and they're simmering in this broth, as you're stirring, they break down a little bit and release some of their starches, and that helps this broth become nice and thick. Of course, now I'm stirring it, so it's not going to want to come to a simmer, but it will. Here we go. Okay, so I'm going to add my asparagus, and conveniently I've got about 5 minutes left on the timer for the chicken. So I'm going to kind of use that for the asparagus. It takes about 5 minutes, sometimes less, depending on if you get the super skinny asparagus spears or the thick ones. But these are going to sort of steam in the broth with the beans. Now it's looking like stew. Okay, moving on to kale, Kale 101. There are many different varieties of kale that are grown in the US. The kind of two most popular or kinds that you'll see most often at the grocery store are curly kale, which looks like this little guy, and Tuscan or lacinato or dino kale, which is this sort of darker, brighter green with a flatter leaf. Both work for this recipe. Oh, turn that down. I wanted to show you because I had like 2 pieces left over from the last bunch I used for something. So I'm going to show you both just to see the difference. These are already washed. We'll start with my curly kale. And I'll just say that for raw salads, I use both curly and the Tuscan kale. I think a lot of people prefer Tuscan kale. It doesn't have that kind of like bitter earthiness that curly kale has raw. And it also, I think there's something maybe off-putting to some people about how curly and kind of fibrous curly raw kale is. So I leave that up to you. For this recipe, we're cooking it anyway, so it's not gonna matter a whole bunch. But for both kinds of kale, we're gonna get rid of this middle rib or stem, which is very tough and is not gonna be delicious. So there's 2 ways to do this. The easiest way is just hold the rib and kind of strip the leaves off yourself. I think this is the easiest way, but I'll show you the other way. The other way is you can just cut them off. I think my timer might be slightly wonky. Might ring again, we'll see. Our Tuscan kale, rip it off. Of course, now that I say that, cutting it was pretty easy, but there's something satisfying about ripping the kale. If you don't have kale or if you don't like kale, you can still make this recipe. It works great with baby spinach. Regular spinach would work. You could do Swiss chard. You can do collard greens. You could even do like broccoli rabe if you already steamed it. Broccoli rabe takes a little bit longer to become tender. And this is just gonna cook for a couple minutes. So I like kale or spinach for how quickly they cook, but any kind of hearty green that you have will work great. And not to keep going on and on about kale, but I'll just say that we want a sort of small bunch of kale for this recipe. You'll see that it doesn't shrink as much as spinach does. So if you get a huge bunch of kale, just use about half of it. And our last little piece of curly kale here. All right, where did my knife go? It's hiding under the kale. Oh, our asparagus, our heat turned off. Don't worry, one of my favorite things about stews and soups is that they're pretty foolproof and it'll be great, kind of no matter what you do to it, which is always nice when you're cooking. Great. So I'm gonna bring that up to a nice kind of vigorous simmer, and we'll chop our kale. I'm just gonna do kind of a coarse, rough chop. I would say it's about bite-sized pieces. Again, because kale is not gonna reduce as much as a spinach, I like to keep the pieces on the smaller side, just so you don't get like a kind of an unwieldy piece of green in your stew. Give that a stir. Another reason that I like to add the kale kind of towards the end is the more you cook a hearty green like this, kind of the more it loses its nice bright green color. And it kind of turns brown, and I love the bright green shades in this soup, so I like to add it and cook just until it's wilted. Okay. This is certainly simmering. Good. So I'm just going to add my kale at this point. So I'm going to give this a nice toss, and the beauty of having a simmering broth is that it will just steam the kale. You don't have to pre-cook the kale or anything. So give it kind of a gentle stir. I don't like to break the beans up in this too much because I find that the broth can get really too thick. So I'm a little bit gentle as I'm stirring this, just because canned beans are so tender. You don't have to worry so much if you are starting with beans that you cooked yourself. All right, I'm just going to clean these scraps. I'm gonna lower the heat a smidge. And I'm gonna check on my chicken because I'm pretty sure that the timer, something happened with the timer, so one sec. All right. There's a really great sizzle you can't hear, but they look great, they smell great, they're golden brown. I'm just gonna put these down here. Sorry, disappearing for a second. And we're gonna let our chicken thighs rest while I finish the stew. I love to make this stew with the chicken thigh because, first of all, I like the process of using the chicken fat, rendering the chicken fat, and then using that to cook the vegetables. But I also like, you kind of have this warm, hearty stew with, beans, which are creamy, and the softened vegetables. And so I like to pair that with kind of a salty, crispy chicken skin. I think it's a great combination. Plus, then you've really got like a full meal. And it's almost a one-pot recipe. It's not quite because of the sheet pan, but with the foil, you barely have to clean it at all. So I'm gonna dare to say this is pretty much a one-pot recipe. Okay, we've got a question or a chat. Let's see. What was your favorite Bowden meal? Oh, 2 people asked that. Oh no, 1 person asked that. Oh no, 1 person. I'm like, okay, this is not like a great culinary answer, but my favorite meal at Bowden, hands down, was breakfast, and specifically the same breakfast that I had almost every day, which was oatmeal, preferably cream of wheat with cereal on top and then milk on top. And I would make these like kind of weird concoctions with whatever like sweet stuff was being served for breakfast. But definitely I have fond memories of the oatmeal and the hot cereals from Bowden, except for the rice cereal, which I was always very grumpy to see in the morning. I don't know if people follow Bowden Dining on Instagram, but they have been posting some of the favorite recipes, and they've just posted the cream of wheat recipe. So I was thinking about maybe making that as a little quarantine treat. It has 2 cups of half and half, which feels like a lot for breakfast, but that's clearly the secret to why we all loved it so much. Okay, you can see that the kale is nice and wilted, but still bright green. And by this point, the broth is thickened just about where we want it. It isn't thick and kind of heavy. It's just lightly thickened and kind of gives some resistance when we're stirring here. Great. Okay, we are just about ready for our green peas. So I'm going to grab those. And while I'm at it, sorry for walking away. We've got a big, beautiful bowl of fresh herbs that I'm going to add. I've got mint, chives, and dill, but we'll get to that in a minute. Got a half a cup of frozen peas. They're very frozen. There we go. By all means, use fresh peas if you have them. But a friend asked me, like, what am I supposed to do with all of this frozen and canned stuff that I bought? I haven't even like used it. So this is kind of one way to use it up. I feel like everybody has a bag of peas in their freezer. So we're just gonna give this a stir again, kind of cook for a couple more minutes, just until those peas are heated and cooked through, which doesn't take very long. But now you can see it's nice and thick. In the meantime, let's see if we got another chat. This is fun.
What knives would you recommend for a beginner?
I'm glad you asked. I use Wüsthof knives. Wüsthof makes several different lines. I like their classic line. It has, the blade goes all the way through to the handle, so you have a very nice sturdy grip on it. These knives are not cheap. I think this one was like, I don't know, maybe like 70 bucks, which I know is a lot, but I use it for pretty much everything. The only exception is I use a serrated knife, like with the old jagged edges for cutting bread, or a serrated knife for tomatoes. But for the most part, this is like the only knife you need. This is a 6-inch chef's knife. An 8-inch, if you're like a really big person, an 8-inch might be better for you, but the 6-inch for me is like the perfect knife. I feel like I am in control. It's sharp. It does everything I need. And if you're gonna start cooking, I think it's better to have one really good knife that you can use for everything than like a set of crappy knives and you're constantly like cutting yourself and having a hard time with things. I think it's kind of a myth, you know, that a sharp knife is gonna cut you, but in reality, a dull knife is gonna cut you because, for example, if I'm cutting this shallot and I've got a dull blade, there's a greater chance it could kind of like slip. So a sharp knife is always your friend. I hope that answers your question. Okay, I'm just gonna bring this up to a little more of a simmer. Perfect. And I think this is just about, oh, we got another chat.
Request for the promo code.
Oh, I'm gonna send it in. Sorry guys, it's polar bears. Did that work? Thank you for reminding me about that. Okay, this is exactly where we want it in terms of thickness. If it were too thick, if it looked kind of more like a side dish than a stew is what I like to say, you can add a little bit of the chicken broth that's left over. Or if it's too thin, we are gonna add a few ingredients that'll thicken it a bit, but if it's still too thin looking, just sort of simmer it for a few more minutes. You don't wanna go overboard, but you do wanna get a nice thick broth. So that's it. I'm gonna turn up the heat, and we've got some very exciting finishing touches for this stew. First of which is Parmesan cheese. So here's my half cup. I'm gonna use a half a cup of Parmesan. You could also use Pecorino, which I love. I will say Pecorino is saltier than Parmesan, so you wanna maybe use a little bit less salt if you're gonna use Pecorino. But Parmesan's like something that I feel like everybody usually has on hand in some form or another. It's kind of a classic. So I'm gonna do, I think it's actually a 1/3 cup. We're gonna start with a 1/3 cup and see how that goes. So I'm just gonna sprinkle it in. And this is off the heat. We don't want to go overboard on the heat with Parmesan because if it gets too hot and if it gets too cooked, it can kind of separate and become gluey. So because this is off the heat, that Parmesan is just going to melt nicely right into the broth and thicken it. It smells so good. I mean, it's kind of incredible how much just that third cup of cheese really thickens this broth. Oh, we got another chat. Let's see.
What is your opinion on wooden cutting boards versus plastic cutting boards?
Oh, I do have an opinion on that. I like both. I like the way a wooden cutting board looks, obviously. It looks great, but they're kind of a pain to clean. And I have a big one over here that I keep on the counter for things like bread, or it's kind of nice and protects the counter. But I use a plastic cutting board every time I cook, and then I just throw it in the dishwasher, and when it gets worn out, I throw it out and get a new one. You don't have to worry about it. You can cut meat on it, you can cut onions on it, you can cut lemons on it. Anything that you would kind of worry maybe about with a wooden cutting board, you don't have to worry about. It's not as nice looking, but it's very practical and it gets the job done. And also it's just smaller, it's kind of easier. So I have these in a bunch of different sizes. And they do last a while putting them in the dishwasher. So yeah, that's my thought. Okay, I'm gonna keep this hunk of Parmesan for something else. And I'm gonna grab some lemons. So one of the important finishing touches for this stew is freshly squeezed lemon juice. Really adds a nice acidic note at the end of the dish and kind of like wakes the whole thing up. When you're dealing with hearty foods or really almost anything, a nice little squeeze of something like lemon juice or vinegar or even white wine, depending on what it is, really just kind of heightens all the flavors and kind of cuts through the richness of any dish like this. So what I like to do is just grab a little strainer like this one. You could use a bigger one if you have it. Anything works. And you can certainly do this into like a glass measuring cup ahead of time, but I'll save a dish and I just squeeze the lemon right over the strainer. These are huge lemons and they're really juicy. So I'm not gonna go so crazy on this one. We'll see if it needs it, and then we'll give it a nice stir. And that lemon is such a nice spring flavor too with all these veggies. It smells so good. I'll stop saying that, but it does. Yum. Okay. And at this point, I am just going to taste for seasonings and see how we're doing on salt and pepper. That's what we want. It's great. It's got a nice richness from the Parmesan, kind of a nutty flavor. It's got that bright lemon. All the veggies are perfect. We're gonna do a little salt and a little pepper. Give it a nice stir. And then our herbs. Let's get rid of these guys here. So any kind of soft, fresh herb will do. Soft herbs are the ones that go bad more quickly. That's kind of the easiest way to put it. Parsley, oh, I don't know if I'd use cilantro, but dill, chives, mint are gonna add a really great final note of spring to this stew. You don't have to use all three. I happen to have all three because I've been cooking like crazy, but even if you just have one, you'll really notice the kind of like, I don't know, fresh note it adds in the stew. So we get some mint, we'll do some chives. I put these in the little bowl so it'd be like a cooking show just coming out perfectly, ready to go. Dill. Dill is a strong flavor. I know some people don't like dill. I think it's really great, especially with all of these flavors, but I would say chives and mint would be like more essential for this stew if you want to pick. So with the chives, I just line them up kind of the way we did the asparagus, same deal, and give them a little chop. You don't have to go too fine here. Long guys. Dill. And with the dill, I just get rid of this kind of thicker middle stem and use the fronds. Thick stem here. And then with our mint leaves, don't want to use the stem from the mint, way too tough. So just pick the leaves off and give them a nice rough chop. All right.
We got questions on questions. Let's see. Okay. Do you ever use non-stick pans? Great question. I do. I use non-stick pans for pretty much just one thing, and that is eggs. Eggs are really hard to clean off of stainless steel pans like this one. The proteins in the eggs make them really sticky. So it's so much easier if you're scrambling or frying an egg, making an omelet, to just use a non-stick pan. I tend not to use them for other things just because I feel like nothing really develops a nice crust on a non-stick pan, and also I don't want all that like Teflon, but I do make an exception for eggs so I don't have to spend my life doing dishes. All right, I'm gonna do about half of these herbs, call it like a small handful, sprinkle them right in. Oh, there's a big chive. Sprinkle them right in. So these herbs are not being cooked, but they're kind of just softening a little bit in the stew. Yum. And what I like to do, I'll show you, is I have some of the herbs in the stew and then I'll just do a little bit for garnish, which is nice. Great. We're ready to plate. This is pretty much it. It's amazing how the time flies. Okay, where are my bowls? Oh, I have to grab one thing, sorry. I'm gonna do a little microplane of lemon zest, which I'll show you. We have another chat. Fennel fronds in place of dill. Yeah, I don't see why not. If you like fennel, I love fennel. I love the anise flavor of fennel. It's funny how fennel fronds look just like dill. I would say absolutely use them. You could even use celery leaves. It's not quite, I'm not gonna say it's a garnish because I feel like the word garnish implies it doesn't have any flavor. It just looks pretty. But any kind of fresh herbal note you can add to this is really good. So by all means, use what you have. You could even do scallions if you mince them really finely. Scallions are a little bit, have a stronger onion flavor, so I wouldn't cut them too big, but if you can get a nice mince, a scallion would be great too. That's a good question.
Okay. I'm gonna try to do a nice job of plating this now. Just wipe my counter. All right. Hope everyone's hungry. So I'm going to spoon. I'm going to take one of our chicken thighs, this lucky number, and I'm using a kind of a shallow bowl here. You can absolutely use a dinner plate. I just like to use almost like a pasta type bowl so that it does have the sides for the stew. And you can kind of nestle the stew in around the chicken thigh. So let's get a nice spoonful here. And you can see as I'm scooping this that the consistency is a lot thicker than it was about 10 minutes ago, which is exactly what we want. Now for the final touches. First, I'm going to, what am I going to do first? We're going to do the herbs. So I'm just going to give these another chop. They were looking a little bit big in the pot. Okay. So a nice little pinch of herbs kind of over. You get the chicken, but definitely get the stew. And then I'm going to take my lemon and get some lemon zest. Lemon zest is kind of the very outermost part of the lemon peel. The pith is the white part underneath the yellow part of the peel. So when we zest, which is what I'm gonna do using the zester, you wanna do it sort of gently enough that you're not getting down to that white pith, which is very bitter. So I just kind of gently run the lemon back and forth on the zester, and then you can kind of knock the zester to get any little bits out that are stuck in there. And I love this, it gives the plate a really kind of nice, fresh, lemony aroma, and it also looks pretty. Nice little yellow on the plate. And then finally, I'm gonna do actually a little bit of crunchy sea salt, kind of just to finish it. And a little black pepper, because I can't help myself. Get all over the chicken. And that's it. I mean, we made this, I made this, I don't know if you made it, but start to finish in less than an hour. And that was even going, you know, a little bit slower to talk and explain things. So you can see it's really fast. And here she is. I'm gonna take a bite. Oh, we got another chat. What kind of microplane? Funny enough, I think that microplane is the brand name. I think it's like a Kleenex tissue situation. I know that these are also called rasps, which I think is kind of the tissue part, and then the microplane is the brand part. Not 100% sure about that, but just from the way it's written on here, I'm getting a brand name kind of vibe. I just want to say before I finish here that this is a great dish to make for a dinner party, which I know we can't sadly have at the moment, but it's a really nice, simple dish to make ahead because you can just make the whole stew and then reheat the chicken thighs. They'll get really nice and crispy. And I'll also say, which I think I forgot to mention, that if you're a vegetarian, you can absolutely still make this. Just obviously skip the whole chicken part, and I would just use butter instead of olive oil because you want to kind of mimic that richness that the chicken fat is adding, and I think butter would be delicious in this. You can also, if you don't have chicken, you can't find chicken, you could use a little bit of bacon, a little bit of pancetta, which you're probably not going to find if you can't find chicken, but any kind of smoky meat that's going to add a nice flavor to the broth, and you'll use the rendered fat. But I think this would also be a really nice vegetarian main course made without the chicken. Okay, I'm gonna get my knife. This is the fun part. I just want to say before we finish, thank you everyone for coming. This has been fun. I wish I could see everyone's face. It's sort of funny not being able to see people, but it's been, I don't know, it's fun to know you're all out there and all Bowden people. It makes it a lot more fun. Yep. Those finishing touches, the fresh herbs, you kind of smell in the lemon zest even before you take a bite. It's really nice. And the crispy skin, which is also a little bit salty, is really good with the kind of the Parmesan broth. I love this recipe too because it's got a lot of vegetables, but it doesn't taste, you know, overly healthy. It's kind of well balanced and equal parts delicious and satisfying, and also good for you. Okay, I'm not just gonna stand here eating, but I just want to say, oh, let's read the messages and then we'll sign off here. Oh, thanks everyone. This has been a lot of fun and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you had a nice glass of wine while you watched, and hope it's a great start to your weekend. We made it through another week. So with that, I will say cheers. Go you Bears, and hope I'll get to see you all in person sometime soon. All right, have a good night, everyone.